If the snare or the kick drum is too pokey, sticking out of the mix too much, and you want it to sit better in the mix, lower the attack time. The more you lower it, the more you push things into the mix. If you think it's too soft and it needs to jump out more, increase the attack time, let it breathe a bit more, let the transients come through. The more you do it, the more it will jump out at you, and you'll find the sweet spot, which is basically like a back and forth slider for your drums.
Then, how fast is fast and how slow is slow?
Good question. Yeah.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedikt Hein. I am a mixing engineer. I run a mixing studio called Outback Recordings. We mix a lot of songs here, more than 200 per year, and we've been doing that for a long, long time. And everything we've learned from all these mixing projects with bands from all over the world, we kind of put into this format here, into this platform and this podcast, so you can learn from that as well. We've helped a lot of artists, a lot of DIY artists from all over the world record better tracks in their jam spaces so that we can do a better job mixing. And yeah, at some point we started this so you can learn too. And if you're looking to make better recordings in your home studio, in your jam space, then you're in the right place. I'm not doing this on my own. I'm doing this with my friend and co-host, Manel Espinosa Berenguer from Spain. Hello, Manel.
Hi, Benny. How are you? I'm, as always, happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm good. I'm absolutely good. Thank you. So Manel is also a great producer. More like I'm primarily mixing these days. Manel is also producing, recording, making his own music as an artist. So I'm very excited to have him here doing the show with me. And this is how we do it. If you discovered this on YouTube, please know that this is primarily a podcast. So you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you enjoy podcasts. And the other way around too, if you prefer to watch your content, but you've discovered us on Spotify, for example, please go to YouTube, search for the Self-Recording Band, and then you can watch us do this. Today, we're doing, it's kind of almost like an experiment. We are it's the start of a new era for this podcast. We've been doing it for like 250 episodes in a row now. And this year, we try to do something different. We tried to give you audio examples as well, and not just talk about all those things that we talk about here. And so this is totally going to be an experiment today to see how this works. It's going to be a listening exercise. The topic is drum compression. So it is about learning to hear compression, what it does, and specifically it's about how you can shape your drum attack and punch with compression. And I've prepared a bunch of examples, uncompressed and compressed, and kind of A-B versions of that. So you can learn how you can shape your attack and punch in your drums using compression. And we're going to focus specifically on the attack part of it and how the attack time on a compressor can shape that or help you shape that, how you can make drums hit harder or softer, how you can make them more consistent, how you can make them more aggressive or the other way around. So this is going to be the topic for today. Also, I didn't mention it this time on the intro. If you're already a listener and you're coming back, welcome back, of course. We always love having you here. So yeah. Manel, are you ready for a listening exercise?
I'm not ready, but we'll see what you brought here today.
Yeah, so we are using this software called Riverside, which is like our podcast recording software. And it's similar to something like Zoom, whatever, but it's specifically for podcasts. And it lets you load like audio examples into its own little media player, and I can fire those samples. And they hopefully get recorded and we hopefully hear them and then we can hopefully talk about them and, we'll see. It's an experiment, but I'm looking forward to it. So one thing I want to say is I specifically, like intentionally for now at least, decided to not do the typical YouTube thing where, I share my screen and I tweak a bunch of knobs and like do things in real time. We might do that at some point, but it makes it like these podcast recording softwares make it a little harder to do that because you cannot easily route the DAW audio into it, and it's not easy to do it in stereo. Like there's a bunch of limitations, but I thought that is actually a good thing for us because first of all, most of our listeners are listening on podcast apps, so they don't see us anyways. They listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is like 90% plus of our audience. And so we need to make it in a way where you, if you're listening on the go, can still understand what's going on without seeing what I'm doing. And so this is actually a good thing that it forces me to not do that. And then also, I think it's great that we just get to use our ears and don't get distracted by meters and by seeing what I'm doing. So we're focusing on really listening, and then we talk about it, we explain things, and I just hope you can all follow along. And this is how we're going to do this for now, this format. Please leave a comment below or send us a message with feedback, like how you like this, if this is something you want to see do more of. I'm always interested in hearing that kind of feedback, of course. But yeah, Manel, drums are, in essence, like the essence of what drums are is like you hit something with a stick and it makes a loud noise, and that noise has an attack at the beginning, the moment when the stick hits the drum, and then it has a sustain where, depending on the tuning of the drums and the type of drum, it like sustains for a while until it dies off. The attack part of it, when the stick hits the snare, shaping that can make your drums sound harder or softer. It can make it, you can make the performance more consistent if it's not consistent enough. You can make your drummer seem like he or she is hitting harder or softer. And you can create a vibe and kind of an energy that has not been there in the original performance just by using compression. And specifically by shaping the attack portion of it. There's also the sustain. We'll maybe cover that in a different episode, but today I really want to focus on that because most raw drum recordings or most samples that you use, they might sound good, but they might not be perfect for the song that you're currently working on. They might be that they're just a little boring sounding and they need to hit harder to like cut through the song to the mix. It might be that it's a little bit of an inconsistent performance. It might be that it is too pokey, too hard, and you want it to be a little softer. All kinds of things, but it's in most cases, you need some form of shaping to make it work in the context of your mix. So far, so good. I think you both agree.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. All right.
Like,
good.
yeah, sometimes with those, with those samples, I mean, they are not fit for the energy of your song or whatever, and you need to shape it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I like to think about compression is that a compressor is just an automated, very fast volume fader. That's what it really is. So I need to explain this real quick before we go to the examples, just so people know what to listen for. And if you're struggling with the concept of compression, maybe this helps you understand it. So if you look at a compressor as like a very fast automated volume fader, this just means you tell the compressor when something is too loud, like when the input signal is too loud. That's what you set with the threshold. And as soon as the signal goes above that threshold, it tells the compressor, hey, now it's too loud, please turn it down. And then the compressor will very quickly turn the signal down. And the parameters on a compressor tell the compressor how to turn things down, how far, how fast, and how fast to recover and turn it back up again, basically. So the ratio says how far the compressor should turn it down. The attack time says how fast it should turn it down. And the release parameter tells the compressor how fast to turn the fader back up again. And if you set those things right, you get just the right amount of control in just the right time, and you're also recovering quickly enough for the next hit to happen. And so if you set that correctly, the compressor moves musically with your song, for example, or it shapes the transients just the way you want it to, but you have full control over that. But it's really just like a finger on a fader that does a really quick movement. That is, and how that movement looks, you determine that with those parameters. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So now we're focusing only on the attack part, like I said, which means signal is too loud, it's above the threshold, please compress. And attack means how fast do you compress? If you use a very, very fast attack time, the compressor pretty much immediately and super quickly turns the signal down, which means the attack when the stick hits the drums is being turned down immediately, resulting in a softer sound. And then if you also use a fast release time, it goes up again quickly. So the sustain stays the same, but the attack has been turned down. Now you have a softer drum hit. And I'm using drums for this example and for this episode because it's so easy. I think it's an easy way to explain compression because drums are basically just transients, impacts. It's harder to explain it with sustained signals. So the other way is true too. If you use a long attack time, the signal goes above the threshold, the compressor turns it down, but does it slowly so the attack can still come through pretty loud, and then shortly after the compressor turns it down. So you still have a hard attack, but then it gets turned down, meaning the sustain is now a little quieter than the attack, which means the result is more attack and less sustain, harder drum hit. And then how the sustain exactly is shaped is, you can shape that with the release time. We're not covering that today. For all the examples today, I just used a super fast release time, just so it recovers quickly and we have the same kind of situation. The only thing that changes is the attack time. So again, fast attack makes things sound softer because compressor turns down attack immediately. Slow attack time means it sounds harder because the compressor takes longer to turn it down and the attack can come through and then it gets quieter. Okay, so I got a couple of examples, and these are uncompressed drums, a full drum kit, and then compressed drums with different settings. And then I also have just a snare track where it might be even easier to hear what happens. Again, uncompressed and then compressed with fast and slow attack times. And then also an example where I switch back and forth between uncompressed and compressed so you can hear the AB. And now I won't say which is which. I'm just going to play things, and then we'll do a listening exercise, and then we let you as a listener figure out what is going on, and then we will tell you if you're right. And Manel, I'm going to do the same with you. So now we'll see if you get it.
Let's see, yeah.
You will totally get it. And even if not, I'm just interested in hearing how you perceive those signals, because at the end of the day, what matters is how does this feel? And how do you perceive it? Do you think it's softer, it's harder? It's what's the difference? And so you can get an idea of when to use which in your mix, because it's all about being able to use it intentionally. Cool.
Okay, one question only.
Yes.
Is it gonna be you playing the drums?
What you're hearing, if I played the drums there?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Fortunately, it's not me this time. No, it is a snippet from a record that I've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just grabbed it from a session that I've worked on recently. Okay, cool. So let's do just the snare first, because I think it's a little easier to hear it on just an isolated thing, so we know what to listen for. So I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to play the uncompressed first, so you can hear that, and then we'll do the rest. Okay, so this is totally an experiment. First time ever I hit a button like this. Let me know if you hear that, Manel, and I hope it ends up being on the episode. If not, then we have a problem. Okay, so uncompressed snare drum. So far, so good. Compressed snare drum. I'm not going to tell you what I've done. And now here's an AB of that same setting against the uncompressed again. I'm going to play that again. It starts uncompressed, then the compression kicks in, and then it goes back to uncompressed. What happened when the compression kicked in?
It turns down the transients, I would say, because it sounds like the snare sounds a bit more quiet, or that's how it feels.
Yep.
And then I think how do you call it? Like what comes after
The sustain.
the sustain sounds a little bit more like it's more like easier to notice.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. So the volume is the same, and I I didn't change anything except the attack parameter. The rest is the same. So the sustain volume stayed the same, but the attack part of it, the first part of it, got turned down. And so now the focus is more on the sustain. The drum sounds softer overall. The hard stick attack is gone. It's more consistent also. Every hit is pretty much the same volume now. And it seems like the sustain got louder, but in fact, just the attack got quieter. If we now turn the signal up to the same peak volume, it would be louder. Basically, it would sound louder because there's less attack, more sustain. So which attack setting did I use to achieve that?
Like really fast.
Yes.
Like ultra fast.
Exactly. Pretty much killed the attack completely. And I just used a stock compressor for that. So you can do that with any kind of compressor. I just used the fastest possible attack time, immediately killing the transient. So one more time so you can follow along now that you know what happens. In the beginning, you hear a natural snare, and then you hear the compressor kick in, killing the attack with a fast attack time, and then it goes back to uncompressed. Okay, good. Now, next example. Same snare drum, but a different thing that happens. So the uncompressed is the same, but here it is. So uncompressed again one more time. Okay, and now the compressed one. Okay, and now the A-B between the compressed one and the uncompressed one. I think it starts uncompressed, then compressor kicks in, and then it goes back to uncompressed. Okay, everything is the same as in the previous example. Nothing's changed. The only change is the attack time is different. So how do you perceive that?
I would say that now the snare sounds even louder, or I perceive it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you set up the attack not as fast.
Very slow, actually. Pretty slow attack time. Yep, exactly. So now the attack can come through. Then the compressor kicks in, and then it turns down the rest. So there's more focus on the attack this time. And I think it got louder because I tried to, I think when I did it, I tried to match the sustain portion of it so that the sustain kind of stays the same. And the difference is noticeable always in the attack. So in the last example, the sustain was the same, the attack got less. Now the sustain was the same and the attack got more. So it sounds louder now. There's more attack at the beginning.
One question
Yes.
I have here. Then, how fast is fast and how slow is slow?
Good question. Yep, perfect. So fast is, in this case, as fast as it goes, which for most stock compressors, this would be below like 1 millisecond usually, or maybe it's 1 millisecond or something, but most stock compressors, digital compressors can be like insanely fast. Or if you use a limiter, which is just a very, very, very fast compressor, it is attack times below 1 milliseconds. It's immediately and even if you have a limiter with a look ahead or a compressor with a look ahead feature, you can even make it so that it sees into the future and turns it down immediately when it happens, which means 0 milliseconds. But in this case, I think it's 0.1 milliseconds or something. So pretty much immediately. And slow means, for drums, at least for me, even if your attack time goes up to whatever ridiculous amounts, like a second or something, which doesn't make sense. Some compressors do that. But for me, slow means 20, 30 milliseconds, something like this. As soon as you get to double digits, it's already noticeable that the attack can come through a little bit. And as soon as you get to like 20 or 30, that's where the punch really comes back. So when you compress something really hard and then you slowly turn up the attack time, as soon as you reach 20 to 30 milliseconds, this is when you really hear the stick attack and the punch come through. And then let's say 30, 40, 50. If you go higher than that, nothing, like not much will change. Most of the attack will already be able to come through. So I think in this case, it was like 30, 40 milliseconds, something like this on the slow attack and 0.1 on the fast attack. This is why you see on many common, like popular compressors, like for example, a bus compressor, it goes from 0.1 milliseconds to 30 milliseconds, for example. These are common values. And longer than 30 is almost like never really needed. There are always cases, but so yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that even though we're talking about slow attack, it still is fast, like in human perception.
Yes, you would not be able to react that fast to turn it down within 30 milliseconds like that. That's why we need the compressor, because you wouldn't be able to do that manually. Yeah, right. Totally. It's still very, very fast. Absolutely. But slow enough for the initial punch to come through. It's just a blink of an eye moment where the attack happens. You gotta realize that this whole movement of the compressor, of the attack and release and all that, happens within a single drum hit. So the stick just hits the drum real quick, and during that moment, the entire compression movement happens. So it has to be really, really, really fast. Release parameters can be a bit longer, so it makes sense sometimes to have a second release or something, because maybe it's a slow groove and you want the compressor to just recover just right before the next hit comes in. Maybe it's a sustain instrument like bass, where you want a gradual sort of limiting, leveling kind of thing. So it makes sense to have the recovery time slower based on the tempo of the music, but the attack time usually lives in a very, very short range of like values. Yeah.
Okay, another question.
Yes,
now that you
please.
you mentioned it, like what's the difference between leveling and compression?
Great question. I don't think there's a difference. Leveling is a form of compression, but I know what you mean. So I think about it as if I use compression, there are a couple of reasons for why I would do that. I always try to be intentional. I don't use it just because, right? So one reason could be what we just showed you, to shape my transients. Transients meaning the attack time, the initial impact of a signal. This could be one reason. If I think something needs to be harder or softer, I use a compressor to achieve that. There's other ways too, but a compressor is a common one to achieve that. This would not be leveling. This would be shaping of the transients. Another reason could be that I just like the sound of a certain compressor because it maybe has a nice distortion to it. Maybe it has, if it's emulations of some analog gear, or maybe it just has a characteristic in the way that it works that I just like on certain instruments. And I'm not so much about the compression in this case, but about the tone of that plugin or piece of gear. In that case, it's more of a creative tool. Could also be a reason to use compression. Sometimes I don't compress much at all then. I just like the sound of it. Another reason could be to make things more consistent. So if you noticed with the first example with the fast attack time, if I compressed a lot here to really get the point across, so I completely killed the snare. But like if you use that setting and only compress a little bit, like just a dB or so in gain reduction or 2 dBs, and maybe only on the loudest hits and not the other ones, then you can make an inconsistent performance more consistent by turning down the attack only on the loudest hits. And so everything moves closer together. So you noticed in the first example, every hit was almost exactly the same because I completely killed all attacks. So making a performance more consistent in terms of the attacks can be a goal with compression. Leveling would be another goal. And this is if I want to not really change the attacks and sustains of the individual notes or hits, but I want something to be a little more dense and less dynamic overall, so that I turn a very dynamic performance into something more solid that I can make and sit in the mix well without having to turn it up a lot. I just reduce its dynamics intentionally, but not in a milliseconds way, but more over time across the entire performance. That would be leveling. So this would not be something I do on drums, but like on bass or vocals. I could use two compressors in a row, for example, to achieve two things. With a vocal, for example, it could be very common to have one super fast compressor to shape the transients, the plosives, the consonants, the aggressiveness of the voice, make it either softer or more aggressive. And then I could use another compressor for leveling, which overall keeps the vocal in a certain dynamic range so that I don't have to turn it up super loud in the mix and it still cuts through. It just makes sure that there is nothing really quiet and nothing super loud going on. And it's a gradual thing where the gain reduction meter doesn't move fast all the time. It just stays down all the time, keeping the vocal under control. Same with bass. That would be a leveling example. Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. So let's go to a full drum kit. Here's the uncompressed signal. Okay.
It's really solid.
It is, right?
Yeah.
But this was uncompressed. There was individual compression probably on the tracks, but the drum bus, the sum, was not compressed. So now let's go to this one. And now the AB. And now I do it again, and I don't want you to listen to just the kick and the snare. Listen to the hi-hats and the crashes also, and see what changes or if anything changes. And how the cymbals versus the shells, if that balance kind of changed. So how did you perceive that?
Well, to me, it feels like if the drum kit was so far away, like before compression, it feels like closer, and then it feels like far away, and the hi-hat does weird things because I guess like it's kind of, like the drum set is responding to the loudest hits, which are normally the snare and the kick. So when that happens and the other things are also sounding, they do weird things always. Also
there's pumping because because every time the snare or kick gets turned down, the rest gets turned down as well. This creates kind of a pumping effect. Yeah. So it's cool that you say it's distant, sounds further away. It's totally true. Did you notice that the volume of the cymbals basically stays the same, but the shells seem to get like 10 dBs quieter?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think happened? Or like which kind of attack setting would that be?
I would say, I don't know, I would say, let's see if it's right or not. I would say it's quite fast because the attack of the the kick and the snare is faster than, I don't know, I guess that's because of the materials that are involved or whatever, but I don't know.
Yeah, it is fast attack and absolutely fast attack time because you hear that the transients get turned down immediately. There's not like a big punch coming through anymore. The transient sounds softer, but overall, it's also a little more, with the whole drum kit, something changes about it all. So with a snare on its own, it clearly sounds softer with that setting. On the drum kit, the attacks also sound softer, but there's also additional energy to a degree because the room comes up in relation to the attack, and it sounds like there's more energy in the room coming back from the walls, which makes us think it's actually more energetic in a weird way. So it is softer, but also it doesn't have less energy. It's not just softer, it's more roomy. It's more, there's a little more movement, there's the pumping. So a reason to use that kind of setting, not as extreme maybe, or maybe you could, would be if you compress room mics. For example, if you just have a pair of room mics or room samples or something, not the main drum kit, and you compress it aggressively like that, and then you blend it in with the rest of the kit, this can make the room sound bigger than it actually is. So if you track in a small room, or if you use samples that are not too big sounding, if you compress it like that and you kill the attack and you let the sustain come through super loud, and you add a little bit of movement and pumping, then you add a sense of energy and aggression to it. without making the transients louder. And if you blend that, it just seems like the room is bigger, and maybe it even sounds like the drummer's hitting a little harder if you blend that with the rest of the kit. Or if you take the entire drum kit and you compress it like I did now, and you blend that against the dry, which is called parallel compression, you can keep the original and then add a little bit of that extra roomy, aggressive kind of vibe. And then the peak levels will pretty much the same. You won't get any clipping, but you'll get more sustain, more room, more depth, more size by doing that. So you could over-compress a part of the kit intentionally and blend it with the uncompressed one with a setting like that. Because by controlling those attacks, you won't get crazy peaks. If you add the two together, you will just get a little more sustain and vibe, right?
Okay, now
Yes.
Can you define, please, for me, what pumping is?
Absolutely. It's what you described when you said the cymbals are doing weird things. So when we have the entire kit with the cymbals, the shells are fast attack sounds. The cymbals are sustained sounds. So they ring on the entire time. Basically, there's this like noise floor almost of like cymbals the entire time. And every time a drum hit is happening, the compressor turns that down because it's the loudest part of the signal. But the compressor doesn't just turn down the snare. It doesn't have access to that if you compress the entire drum kit. It turns down the whole signal. So the hi-hat that's below the snare or the crash cymbal or whatever also gets turned down with the snare, but just for a short moment. So when the snare is gone, the compressor goes back up. And so in the uncompressed version, the hi-hats just make and in the compressed version, they make so they go away for a second and come back up. You know, when the snare hits, they go up and down. And if that happens really fast, the cymbals do a kind of movement with the drums, and that's pumping. If it's an entire mix, it's the same thing. If you compress an entire mix really hard, or you limit it very hard, then whatever's the loudest thing in your mix will cause the compressor to react or the limiter, and then when it reacts, it turns the entire mix down for a short moment, and then the whole mix starts to move with the drums. This can be intentional or it can be unwanted, but this is what we call pumping. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great questions, Manel. It's awesome. Yeah. So, okay, let's go to the next example here. We have, again, the uncompressed drums. Okay. And then we have this. A little harder to hear without the AB. I'm going to play the AB now. And one more time. In the middle, the compression turns on for a moment. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say that now it's, all the shells and the cymbals are more balanced. Like before compression, it's more about the shells. Like the shells have more presence, whatever. And then when the compressor hits in, it's a bit more balanced. And I think we can hear a bit more of the room when the compression, so I guess.
And what about the transients? Because you're still talking about, that's all correct, but we're still mainly focusing on the attack time. So what do you think about the attacks of the drums?
I'm thinking, but yeah, I would say probably not as fast, but still quite fast, probably.
Yeah, you're totally right. This was a little more tricky this time. You're absolutely correct. So it is not, like this last example was a more realistic example of drum compression. It was still a little more than what you would do often maybe, but like just to get the point across, but it is a more realistic example. So it's a longer attack time, not crazy long, and also, I mean, what was it, like 10, 15 milliseconds, something like this. And also not a ton of gain reduction. You could use, still on a drum bus, you can absolutely use 30 milliseconds, like I said, to make it really transparent. But I just wanted to show you that everything else was the same compared to the first example, by the way. Just wanted to show you that as soon as you increase the attack time from 0.1 milliseconds or whatever the fastest is to just like 10 or 15 milliseconds, it immediately opens everything up. It doesn't pump as much. The transients can still come through a little bit, but it is also a little more consistent than the uncompressed. It's more balanced, as you said. It's not crazy pumping, but it's audibly compressed, and the attacks even sound a bit harder. So there is a little more focus on each of the drum attacks without making it overly pokey and like without the transients jumping out too much. It's not digging into the cymbals as much. It's not pumping that much. It just adds a level of like consistency, and it makes it sound a little more aggressive and a little harder sounding too. So this would be a great way to just add a bit more punch without completely destroying the drum kit. So it's same parameters as in the first example. It's fast release time, which the fast release time, by the way, is why the room comes up, because the compressor just recovers really quickly and the room just stays untouched, basically. So it's still fast release time on all these examples, but with a super fast attack, it really digs into the entire drum kit and everything sounds super compressed immediately, and the attacks are gone and the cymbals start pumping and all that, which could be great on rooms, but maybe not on the entire kit. And with just a little bit of more attack, like 10, 15, 20 milliseconds, it gets all natural again. It still has control. The transients come through. It adds a little punch. It's a little harder sounding, but not in a crazy way. And that's what happened on this last example. So a good drum bus compression setting could be anywhere between like very short if it's super inconsistent and you really want to just control a couple of peaks, to like medium where we had it now, where you have a certain amount of control all the time. There's a little bit of punch, but it's still pretty compressed, or all the way to a very slow attack where you really want to emphasize the punch more because it just sounds too soft. So anywhere in between that. And the realistic scenario would probably be like a 10 to 30 milliseconds attack, somewhere there. If the snare or the kick drum is too pokey, sticking out of the mix too much, and you want it to sit better in the mix, lower the attack time. The more you lower it, the more you push things into the mix. If you think it's too soft and it needs to jump out more, increase the attack time, let it breathe a bit more, let the transients come through. The more you do it, the more it will jump out at you, and you'll find the sweet spot, which is basically like a back and forth slider for your drums. So the shorter the attack time is, the more you push it back. You said it sounds distant with very short attack times. So you push it back into the mix. The slower it gets, you pull it out of the mix and it jumps at you. And somewhere in between is going to be your sweet spot. And so, yeah, these are the settings I used in these examples. Is not something that you can just apply and, it will always work, because it's always about the context of the song, of course. But also drum compression is fairly simple. And in most cases, I go with, like, do I want more punch? Yes. Then I go with like 20, 30 milliseconds and shortest attack because it's aggressive and nice. Awesome. Shortest release, because it's aggressive and nice. Awesome. If I want it to be softer, I go with super fast attack time. Also probably fast release and dial into taste. And if I just want overall control without anything crazy, I go for like the middle, 10 milliseconds or something. But it's always in that kind of range. So, yeah, I really hope this was kind of helpful and helped you demystify the whole attack parameter a bit more. And if it's one thing that you take away from this, it's short attack times means killing the attacks, pushing the thing away from you, making it softer. Longer attack time means letting the attack through, make it seem more punchy, pulling it out of the mix, make it jump at you. And somewhere in between is going to be your sweet spot. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Nice. So, Manel, I have a couple of final questions for you. This was a rock drum kit, right?
Yep.
When you don't have to deal with the inconsistencies of a drummer and everything that's part of a kit with the cymbal bleed and all that kind of stuff, but when you work with individual samples, like when you do a pop arrangement with electronic samples, for example, you don't have to deal with all these problems. So you can purely focus on shaping the sound to your liking. Are there any like go-tos, or is there anything about that is completely different to like compressing quote unquote real drums? Or how do you use compression? Is it more of a creative sound shaping tool for you then, because you don't have to correct any performance issues? And like how do you think about drum compression when you don't have a real rock drummer in front of you?
I would say it's not that different, because even though, yeah, you may not have like room sound or even overheads or whatever and stuff like that, or bleed that can get in your way or whatever. You also want, for example, like instruments to like interact with themselves, like if they were played in a real situation. So I always try like to, I don't know, to, if I have percussion elements, I want those to interact with whatever snare I have in place or whatever. So at the end, you can use compression in the exact same way. Like you probably have less, sounds in your way or whatever. But yeah, and I also like to use it in a way, like for example, not only with percussion elements, like maybe have a synth that I want it to interact with the snare or with the kick or whatever, like with some sort of side chain or whatever. So
yeah,
I don't think there's a big difference.
That's what I wanted to hear. It's still a transient, punchy signal that you can shape to your liking. You don't have to correct inconsistencies in playing or whatever. You can do that in the programming, but you just shape how hard something hits, how long it sustains, how aggressive it sounds. You give it a certain vibe, and you use it as a creative tool. And you also, like you said, you make it interact with other things in the mix. Can be intentional pumping, can be sidechaining, can be making it sit better in the mix. It's all about context. But yeah, it's exactly the same. And it's not just limited to drums. I was asking this mainly because if you have a very percussive sounding acoustic guitar strumming or something, or if you have any other instrument that's very percussive, or rap vocals, aggressive rap vocals, metal vocals, anything that has kind of transients and sounds percussive, then the same principles apply. It's exactly the same. The only really thing where like a different thought process is necessary is with like truly sustained signals, like a synth pad or a soft played bass guitar or anything that doesn't have transients. Then it's a little different. But anything that sounds percussive, you can think of that as we just explained with these drums. You can think of an attack and a sustain part, and you can shape those two individually and create the sound that you want, that is as hard, as soft, as close, or as distant as you want it to sound.
Yeah, because I think like also, even if we're still talking about drums, for example, if like when you play rock or metal drums or whatever, normally it's like super energetic, like the snare hits really hard and whatever. But I don't know, maybe if you are in a R&B or a jazz setting where maybe the drummer doesn't have to play the snare as hard, So, I mean, you have to apply the same things, but differently, because the snare is not going to stick out the same way and so on. So,
yep, correct. Yeah, I love that. Awesome, great. So I think I hope this was a successful experiment. We'll see, and you'll bring some examples too. Hopefully, Manel, I want to be your guinea pig sometime at some point too, and answer your questions, and then let's see where this goes. I think this can be a fun format. Let us know if you enjoyed that. Let us know if that was helpful for you at all. And if you are struggling with the entire concept of compression, for example, or other things, and you want really to really fully understand it, or if you are like, fine, I get it, but how do I apply this to my song? And I don't know what's appropriate, and I've been trying this for so long, and I just need someone to listen to this stuff and help me. Then please apply for the Self-Recording Syndicate, our coaching, our mentoring program. If you go to the selfrecordingband.com, you can hit the apply button and apply for mentoring, and then we can do a free call talk about your situation, listen to your music, and create a custom roadmap just for you. We've just changed the way we handle all of this. It's pretty much the same under the hood of like what happens, but the process is you apply, we look at your application, listen to your music. If we think you're a great fit, we'll accept the application. Then we jump on a completely free call. We create a plan together based on your specific situation. And then if you like that plan and you approve it and you think it will help you get to wherever you want to go with your music, then we will we will put this plan into a format that has a clear starting point and a clear end point and all the necessary steps in between. And then we will take a week to 2 weeks maximum to like put that all together. Then we'll add that to our coaching portal, the software that we use to do that. And then you get access and you can start and you have the entire plan right in front of you. So we talk about a situation, we decide to work together, we create the plan for you, custom made. And then when we invite you, you have it right in front of you and you can just work your way from where you are now to where you want to be. If that sounds at all interesting, if you want professional mentoring and guidance and unlimited feedback and all of that, go to theselfrecordingband.com and apply now. All right. So, Manel, see you next time. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
And bye-bye.
And yeah, pleasure as always. Bye.